Good morning. I want to invite you into one of my favorite places on earth, the gardens at Lake Merritt. And aren't we lucky that we have this wonderful garden right here in the center of Oakland? I'm standing at the entrance of the garden that's nearest Fairyland, but it's fine if you're also at the entrance near the boathouse. We'll get to where we're going either way. I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to know this garden. About 10 years ago, I visited for the first time. And as I was walking through the garden, I happened to ask directions from Tora Rocha, who was the director of the garden at that time. And as we were walking, we got talking about butterflies. I was a science teacher at the time, and being able to put butterflies in classrooms for kids. And that was the beginning of a beautiful relationship. Since that time, she and I have formed a group called the Pollinator Posse, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. I hope you have some time today to spend walking around this garden. It's an amazing treat that we have here in Oakland. It's actually 17 gardens in one, all put in this little 5-acre area, and they're all maintained by volunteers. You can find palm trees, vegetables, miniature redwood trees, and cactus all in this little area. And it's just a lovely place to be. Today for our lesson, you're just going to need a couple of things. Something to write with, a pencil or a pen, and a notebook or a piece of paper or your science journal, and we'll be ready to go. Before we go any further, let me introduce myself. My name is Terry Smith. As I mentioned, I was a science teacher. I'm retired now from that job. And now I'm a volunteer. I'm a naturalist. I'm an artist. A naturalist is someone who studies the natural world and teaches other people about it. And that's my favorite thing to do. So welcome to the gardens. Let's be naturalists together today. Whichever entrance you came in, we're just going to walk down the path straight to the center of the garden. You'll notice there's a giant red arch called the Torii Gate that's toward the middle of the garden. That's the general area we're headed for. But where we're really headed is the Bee Hotel or the Airbnb. Let's take a walk down that way, and maybe along the way we'll see some of those volunteers working in the garden. Here we go. So if you're interested in volunteering here at the garden, you can always get in touch with me on our website, pollinatorposse.org. There's a contact form, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have after today. And if you see over there to my left, you can see the Torii Gate. We are going to come around here to the Bee Hotel or the Airbnb. So join me here and we'll get started. So I mentioned that Tora and I started a group called the Pollinator Posse. And what we do is we educate people about pollinators. I'm here today to share with you some really important pollinators that most people don't know about. I want to start though with a quick review of what pollination is and why it's important. I find that you may have studied it in school, but very often I talk to adults and kids, and they've either forgotten or they don't quite remember all the details. So before we get started today, we're going to do a quick review on pollination. And it all starts with the plants like we see all around us in this beautiful garden.
Plants do a lot of good things for us. They provide shelter, they provide clothing, they generate oxygen, they shade us from the sun, and they provide just this lovely environment around us. But most importantly, they provide all the food on earth. Everything we eat, or any other creature eats for that matter, either comes from a plant or something that ate a plant. To survive, we know plants need water, sun, and soil. And since we use plants, and they don't live forever, they need to make more plants. They need to reproduce. And in order to reproduce, plants need to make seeds. And to make seeds and fruit, plants need flowers. Those flowers are beautiful, but the reason plants make flowers is to make seeds. That's the whole point of a flower. And if we're lucky, it builds those seeds inside a tasty fruit like this apple. At the base of a flower is a place where the seeds grow called the ovary. To make those seeds, pollen from one flower has to get to the ovary of another flower. Since plants can't move on their own, this can be a problem. Wind and water can help some plants with pollination, moving the pollen around, but more often over time, plants have developed partnerships with some other creatures to help them out. In case you were wondering, these creatures don't do it for free. The flower provides nectar and extra pollen, which feed those cooperative helpers. It's a win-win situation. We call these helpers pollinators because they spread the pollen around. So pollinators get their nectar and pollen to eat and feed their young, and their flowers get their pollen carried to the other flowers. Problem solved. Once the pollen has reached the ovary of the flower, seeds begin to develop inside. The petals of the flower fall away, and the ovary grows into a seed pod and sometimes a fruit or vegetable like this apple, if we're lucky. Unfortunately, a lot of our pollinators are having a hard time and are disappearing. Lack of habitat, pesticides which kill them, and climate change are all having an effect. Some places have even lost all their pollinators, and people have to move the pollen to flowers by hand using small paintbrushes. And it turns out, besides being hard work, humans aren't anywhere near as good at this as bees and other pollinators. This is why I work to teach people about pollinators so we can prevent this from happening here.
Welcome back. Now that you're experts on pollination, we're ready to address our scientific question of the day. And that is, what role do native bees play in pollination, and what can we do to help them? So before we get started, I'm going to do what I do anytime I enter a new space. I'm going to look around, I'm going to see what I notice, and I'm going to see what questions I have about the space. And I'd like you to do the same. So take out your journal and your pencil, find a lovely spot nearby, look around yourself, write down some notes on what you notice around you and what you wonder about. And I'll check back with you in a few minutes. Welcome back. I hope you have a good list of questions and things that you noticed. I'm going to share my list with you. The first that comes to mind is this Airbnb. What's it here for? And why would we need something like this? All these gorgeous flowers around me. This is such a lush place. How is it? Who maintains this? What do I see flying and moving around me? I know there's some crazy squirrels in this garden that just came through. We're going to explore some of those questions today. And if you have questions after we're finished, you can always contact me at pollinatorposse.org. Those emails come directly to me and I'm happy to answer them. So if you remember, the first part of our question today was, what are native bees? And I find, talking to people, that even people who work in gardens like this one have no idea what I'm talking about. Now, as soon as I mention bees, people get a little freaked out and worry about getting stung. Let me assure you, that's not going to happen from any native bees, and I'll explain why in just a minute. But I do want to give you a little introduction to what native bees are. So hang on a minute and let me talk to you about that.
The first bees most people think of when you talk about bees are honeybees, who live in boxes and make honey and are tended by beekeepers. But actually, honeybees are not native to the U.S. or California. They came over with the first European settlers. The native bees were already here, along with the Native Americans. So these bees live in their boxes in huge colonies of hundreds of thousands. They will sting you if they're threatened, but usually they're not going to do that unless you bother them. They die if they sting you, so they're not going to do that unless they feel the threat is very real. European paper wasps are even newer immigrants to California. They've only been here somewhere between 20 and 40 years. You may have seen their nests, which are made out of what looks like paper. They actually chew wood and then use that to make the paper for the nests. They feed on insects, particularly caterpillars, and they can give a pretty painful sting if their nests are disturbed. Yellow jackets. These are the annoying guys that buzz around you when you're trying to eat outside. They're also a type of wasp, and the adults eat sweets like nectar from flowers, but they need to feed the young meat, so that's why they go after your hamburger at the barbecue. They usually build their nests underground and are aggressive. If you've been stung, this is the most likely culprit, not a bee, and it really does hurt. So who are the native bees? Well, first of all, they're native. They have been in California for a long time, longer than most of us humans. There are 1,600 different kinds altogether just in California. They don't sting or make honey or live in large colonies like honeybees or wasps. And they look and act really different from each other and from the other types of bees. Let me introduce you to just a few of these so you can get to know them. Some are quite small, like this small sweat bee on the left, and some are really large, like this black carpenter bee you see on the right. And actually, just so you know, these are on the same scale, so there actually is this much difference in height and size. Now, native bees specialize in certain kinds of plants, certain times of year. So these are squash bees. It turns out that the pollen in squash is really heavy and sticky, and honeybees don't really like it. So they don't visit these flowers, and they don't get pollinated by honeybees. But squash bees specialize, and in fact, the male bees will actually sleep inside the flowers, waiting for the females to come in the morning. So you have them to thank for pumpkins and zucchini. Tomatoes are best pollinated by buzz pollination, which means the bee, usually a bumblebee like this one, comes up to the flower and begins buzzing at a certain frequency. When it does that, the flower releases the pollen in a poof, which then falls on the bee and is carried on to the next flower so we can have tomatoes. There are other key pollinators in this group, like the mason bees, which are super effective at pollinating fruit trees, but these are just a few of the native bees found in this area. So honeybees live in hives like this one, this box created by a human, with thousands and thousands of bees, mostly their sisters, and they share all the work of the hive. And wasps also live in nests that have large family groups. But how and where do the native bees live? First of all, native bees live alone or in small group nests. In general, you can think of them as the single moms of the bee world. A single female creates a nest for her young, either in a small tunnel in the ground or inside the holes in wood or stems of dead plants. Here you can see one of these bees digging a sort of tunnel where she can lay her eggs. That's a lot of work for one little bee, especially if the ground is hard or covered in mulch. The rest of the native bees who don't lay their eggs in the ground are called cavity nesters, and they either use holes that are already existing in wood left by other creatures, or lay their eggs inside of hollow stems of plants like this one. As they work their way down their tunnel, laying eggs and sealing it up, they may use mud like this mason bee to seal the opening, or cut round pieces of leaves like this leafcutter bee, and which they carry back to their nest to wrap around eggs for their young.
So now you know a little bit about native bees, their importance in pollination, and how they're doing. Unfortunately, they're struggling right now because of pesticide use, habitat loss, they don't have places to live, and also the climate is changing and they can't find the plants they need sometimes. So we're trying to do things to protect them. In this public garden, we can't leave wood around for them to nest because people might trip on it, and we need to cover the paths so people can walk. So to make up for that, we built this Airbnb or bee hotel to give them a place to nest. And you can do the same thing in your gardens at home. Make sure there's a place where they can nest in wood, you can see reeds in here, you can see all sorts of different sized holes for the different sized bees. And we've done this to give them a place to live so that they're here in the garden. Now, your first job I want you to do as a scientist, one of the things we do is we keep regular tallies of how something's being used once we build it. So we are curious if the bee hotel is being used, what times of year, what kinds of bees are going in and out. And so I'm gonna get your help to find that out. So while you're here today, what I would like you to do is just sit down for 10 minutes, set a timer, and count the number of flying insects you see in and around the bee hotel. And then when you're finished, you can email it to me through our website, pollinatorposse.org. Give me the date, the time, whether it was sunny, what the conditions were. If you know the temperature, you can usually check that on your phone. And then the number of bees and other flying creatures you saw around the bee hotel. I look forward to hearing from you. So take your 10 minutes, and then I'll see you back here. Welcome back, and thanks for gathering that data for us. Now it's your turn to walk around the garden thinking like a native bee. Are there places that look really welcoming that you think you would like to make your home? Are there places that aren't welcoming at all that maybe we could fix, and you can let us know about that? Are there particular flowers or plants that you see a lot of activity on? Are there others that no one's interested in at all? Here's your chance to make observations like a naturalist. And if you want to share them with me, I would be delighted to hear about them. And remember, if you have any further questions, you can find me at pollinatorposse.org. I look forward to hearing from all of you, and I hope you have a wonderful day being a naturalist here in this garden.